There's going to be risk associated with every fantasy football draft pick that we make. But sometimes you have to ignore that risk to grab the highest possible upside for guys that are going to win your league for you. But at what point does that risk outweigh the hefty reward? Headliner Nation, today I'm going to be diving into some of the top players that you can draft right now that are going to offer you a ton of upside if things go right, because the risk that potentially comes with them could greatly outweigh that. And it's up to us to try and decide if that risk is well worth the investment for a potential league-winning player. And I don't think anybody exemplifies that more than Breece Hall heading into 2023. We talk about it on this channel a lot. Players when they're coming back from injuries. Heck, we even hired a doctor to come in and talk to you all about it. And it just feels like that people forget after a running back tears their ACL that the hamstring and other muscles in the leg can be a huge issue the year after. So the risk with Breece Hall is, when does he even get a full workload? Is it week 1? Is it not until week 5? Do they have to stagger his workload until they know that he's 100% ready to go? And does there come a point this season when unfortunately he just has to deal with some of those lingering effects and he ends up missing games? Those are obviously tough questions to answer. And if you plan on spending a late second, maybe early third round pick on a guy that potentially you want to be your RB1, you have to be ready to back him up. But there is a whole lot to like about the upside that Breece Hall could bring to your fantasy team. Keep in mind that he was on pace for an historic rookie season as a running back. And now with some upgraded weapons, and of course the big upgrade at quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, this is an offense that becomes much more dangerous that doesn't have to be focused on Breece Hall. So when you take a look at running backs last season that had at least 80 rushing attempts, Breece Hall was at the top of a few key categories. He was first, averaging 5.79 yards per carry. He was first averaging 4.3 yards after contact per attempt, and he was first averaging 4.20 yards before contact per attempt. And those numbers don't even take into account the big playability he has in the passing game, where his yards per reception also ranked towards the top of the league. In fact, he was second only to Derrick Henry with running backs that had at least 30 targets. In the 7 weeks that he played last season, the dude finished as a top 24 running back 6 times. 3 of those times inside the top 12. And before the injury, he had scored a rushing touchdown in 4 straight games. Would I love some exposure to Breece Hall this year? Absolutely. But the question becomes, where do you draft him? Because if you're going to have to take him as your RB1, that is going to become a big issue. But if you could nail a really solid running back in the first or second round, also get a top wide receiver in there, and then maybe take Breece Hall in the 3rd round, that works out to be a lot better. Just make sure you fill your roster out with a couple more running backs that you feel like you can trust in case Breece Hall just doesn't have it to begin the year, or he does re-aggravate anything and misses time throughout the season. Before we move on to the next guy though, if you're loving the deep diving information that you're getting here from all of our videos, then you need to make sure that you also get our draft guide. Almost 300 total videos and exclusive content that you won't see here on YouTube. You can buy yours now at thefantasyheadliners.com, link in the description below, but if we get 750 likes on this video, I'm also gonna give one away for free. Yeah, even if you bought yours already, we'll refund it. Just make sure you hit that like button, and then at the end of the video, leave a comment down below letting me know which one of these players you think is going to be the biggest bust this season. What about a guy like Bijan Robinson? Because obviously the guy is super talented and fell into a great situation. And those things combined could give him some of the biggest upside of any fantasy running back this season. but what risks are going to come with that? In fact, Jake did a great video the other day. The thumbnail is right here. And in that video, he broke down what statistics need to be hit for players to hit a certain upside to be a top fantasy option. And for Bijan Robinson, he gave a breakdown on the numbers that would be needed for him to become an RB5 on the season. And keep in mind, Bijan Robinson's ADP right now over on Underdog has him coming off the board as the running back 2 on the year. But when Jake took a look at realistic expectations, he sat out 1,765 total yards for Bijan Robinson. That also included 65 receptions and 10 total touchdowns. And if he were to hit those numbers, which let's be honest, they seem like numbers he could hit, he would finish as the RB5 on the season. But the question is, are you going to be able to draft Bijan Robinson as the RB5, which would put him anywhere in the mid to late first round? Or are you going to have to draft him as the RB2, meaning that more than likely you would have to spend a top 3 or 4 pick to get him? So if we take a little trip down memory lane trying to find the best running backs in their rookie year, I know it feels like when you hit on those rookie running backs, they can help win you your league, but they're not finishing as high as I think a lot of people seem to remember. For instance, since 2019, there are only 5 players to finish as a top 12 running back. Most notably, you had Najee Harris, who finishes the RB4 in 2021. In 2020, you actually had 3 different options with Jonathan Taylor, James Robinson, and Antonio Gibson. And then in 2019, you had that historic performance from Saquon Barkley where, yes, he was the RB2. So again, why don't we take a look at some numbers to see if realistically we believe Bijan Robinson can touch those? Let's start with Najee Harris a couple of seasons ago when he finished as the RB4. In 2021, he had 1,200 rushing yards on just over 300 attempts and scored 7 rushing touchdowns. Then in the passing game, he had an absurd 74 receptions. Then he tacked on 467 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. Based on those numbers right there, Bijan Robinson would need 400 total touches, or very close to it, to finish even as the RB4 potentially. So what would he need to finish as the RB2? Well, let's take a look at Saquon Barkley back in 2019. Saquon Barkley was uber efficient that season with 1,307 rushing yards on only 261 attempts while adding 11 rushing touchdowns. And then this passing game work was absolutely insane with 91 receptions. Those receptions came out to 721 receiving yards, and then he added 4 touchdowns in the passing game. So again, Bijan Robinson would need close to 400 total touches, and he's going to need close to 2,000 total yards while definitely being locked in with more than 10 total touchdowns to hit RB2 status. And even though, yes, the Atlanta Falcons are going to run the ball a lot, and they've talked about getting Bijan included in the passing game, you can't forget that Tyler Algier is there and realistically could take 105 rushing attempts for himself. On top of that, you've got Drake London and you've got Kyle Pitts as well. And you have to imagine that Cordarrelle Patterson is still going to be utilized in the passing game. Now, you can argue that Patterson is at the end of his road and that he's not going to be utilized as much as he was in the past. And that's fine. But if he's healthy and he's on the field, that's just less potential targets for Bijan Robinson, however you want to spin it. And I think the biggest factor here is going to be Desmond Ridder. If he takes a step forward and is able to keep defenses honest, he is going to give Bijan Robinson a great opportunity on the ground and through the air. But if he struggles, if he just doesn't end up being the guy the Falcons thinks he can be, and if they have to make a change at the quarterback position, or it just leads to inconsistencies in the offense, then Bijan Robinson, unfortunately, could see some negative effects from that. But if you have to spend a top 4 pick on Bijan Robinson, and he finishes outside the top 5 running backs, at that point, you got to look at, Was the upside worth it, or was there somebody else I should have taken that high that could have given me a better opportunity? All right, this last one pains me a little bit because at the beginning of the offseason, I looked at Amon St. Brown as a guy that could be a dark horse candidate as a top 5 wide receiver this season. But things have greatly changed since then, and now I'm looking at some of those back end numbers, and I'm wondering how much upside will he truly have in this offense. But let me focus on some positives real quick, because Amon St. Brown is a route runner and is a ball catcher, one of the best in the NFL. The guy separates well, he runs great routes, and he catches anything that comes near him. And all of that could be great for a safe floor. But it's the upside I'm worried about, especially considering that the guy is going as a top 10 wide receiver and being drafted in the 2nd round. Now, the Lions offense absolutely should put up enough yards and enough points that he's going to see a decent amount of targets. In 2022, they were 4th in the league, averaging 380 yards per game. And with 251 passing yards per game, they were 8th in that category. But we know the run game was a big part of what they did last year. Averaging 128 yards on the ground was good for 11th. And they've completely revamped their backfield, bringing in David Montgomery and drafting Jahmyr Gibbs in the 1st round. And that's also where some of the negatives come into play. I just mentioned you drafted Jahmyr Gibbs in the 1st round. You drafted Sam Laporta in the 2nd round. You signed Marvin Jones Jr., who's familiar with Detroit, to come in and replace DJ Chark as the deep threat. And after 6 games, Jameson Williams should be back. And he didn't make a huge impact last year because he was still recovering. But I would expect him 100% fully ready to go come week 7. St. Brown had some inconsistent performances last season as well. He finished as a top 12 wide receiver 4 times, but he only ranked from 13 to 24 with wide receivers twice. 7 times he ranked anywhere from 25 to 36, and then he had another 4 games where he was outside the top 36 altogether. And even though he scored 6 touchdowns, all 6 of those touchdowns came in only 4 games. He had good enough numbers that he was the wide receiver 8 last season. But knowing that he could lose some targets to a revamped offense around him, that is going to be really tough to handle if he doesn't pick up some of the efficiency stats. He barely averaged 10 yards per reception. In fact, his brother in Chicago, Equanimeous St. Brown, he averaged way more than that. So if he loses some of that volume, and he really is that safety net over the middle of the field, more like a Cole Beasley and not a Cooper Kupp, because Jameson Williams and Marvin Jones Jr. will be on the outside, and doesn't score more touchdowns, I don't see him coming back as a wide receiver 9. So if you're looking for a wide receiver 1, St. Brown isn't going to be it, in my opinion. You would have had to have gone with a really high tier wide receiver in round 1. And then if you're drafting him in round 2, he's going to be a safe weekly start for you as your wide receiver 2. But unfortunately, if you go running back or even tight end with your first pick with Travis Kelce, Amon St. Brown probably cannot be on your radar in round 2. You would need him to fall to round 3. But I need to reiterate, this is not a do not draft video. This is a video highlighting some of the risks that come with some of the top options that we could be drafting this season. And while those top options could have a lot of upside that could really help us win a fantasy league, if things don't go right, they could end up hurting us more times than not. So yo, hit that like button for me, and don't forget, if you want a chance to win a free draft guide, you've got to leave a comment down below and let me know which one of these players you think is going to be the riskiest to draft this season. And if we hit 750 likes, I'm picking one of you to get a draft guide. That comments down below. Peace out, Headliner Nation. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll catch y'all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.